1/6 of our economy, meaning health insurance and health care, then you're a moderate in the modern Democrat Socialist Party. But Lan Hee Chen has a good piece. He's over at the Hoover Institution, I should mention. He has a good piece about this. The Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Mike Bloomberg healthcare reform plans.
Yeah.
They claim they're proposing moderate, less disruptive approach to healthcare when they advocate a public option rather than taking away the private health insurance of people who like their private health insurance, as Bernie would do and Warren would do. Medicare for all. Don't believe that is a more moderate option. Lan Hee Chen writes, my research finds that such proposals would increase the federal deficit dramatically, destabilize the market for private health insurance, threatening healthcare quality and choice. History demonstrates this is an axiomatic, this next statement. History demonstrates we should be skeptical of cost estimates that rely on presumptions about how the government will control prices. Political pressure upended similar financing assumptions in Medicare Part B only 2 years after the entitlement's creation. The Johnson administration in 68, then Congress in 72, had to intervene to shield seniors from premium increases. Objections from healthcare providers to lower reimbursement rates have regularly led to federal spending increases in Medicare and Medicaid. The result isn't hard to fathom. If premiums can't rise to cover program costs, or reimbursement rates are raised to ensure access to a reasonable number of providers, who will pay? Well, taxpayers, of course, because these taxpayers were promised a self-sufficient government program. And so the thing continues to spiral out in terms of costs, and the way that you control costs in a centrally planned environment is through what the left complains about when it comes to private health insurance companies, rationing. And so visit Canada and have a discussion about the sort of medical innovation, technological innovation that goes on there as compared to here, the equipment they have versus what we have here, the wait times there versus the wait times here, the access to specialists there versus the access to specialists here. For more on this topic and other general topics that relate to, our older Americans, Amy.
Stop looking at me.
You didn't sign up for
What?
AARP yet, did you?
I did not. I'm not
Good,
going to.
good.
I'm not going to give them $16 a month. For what?
That's very good because
I don't need it.
You should sign up for with the Association of Mature American Citizens, AMAC, which you hear advertised on Dennis Prager's show all the time. We're pleased to be joined by the spokesman for AMAC. He is former Assistant U.S. Secretary of State who ran a major portion of the U.S. House Oversight Committee and a national spokesman for AMAC. He is Robert Charles. He joins us now. Robert, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
I appreciate being asked, and AMAC.us is a great alternative to AARP. They truly are a conservative group. They represent the constitutional rights of people, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth, Sixth, and they talk about things like federal solvency in Washington and the topic you were just talking about, which is the irony in anyone trying to promise something for nothing.
Well, right, and of course,
medical.
Yeah, and of course, AARP was a big cheerleader for Obamacare and is more or less a cheerleader for continuing down that path, regardless of the disagreement over pace between people who are trying to get to the same place.
Yeah, look, the world example, whether it's Canada, Great Britain, other parts of Europe, is very clear. You know what you're hearing out of the people like Warren and Sanders is this Medicare for all, and I've read the bill in both chambers. It's a complete disaster, and you can go line by line. But ultimately, it would bankrupt the country. It wouldn't work, and at the end of the day, you'd end up with just bottom of the barrel, sort of Soviet-style medicine, waiting for it around the clock and around the block. But that's not. That's really even this. I like your reference to the Wall Street Journal piece, because even those who promise something less than that actually deliver just as bad a product. You end up with rationing, low quality, and high cost. And the reason for that is that you ultimately can't get. The government is not the best provider of medical care. Never has been, never will be. The private sector is where you innovate and you get cost reductions tied to that. It's where you get all of the benefits of America's good medicine, which is why people from all over the world come to the United States. They don't come because of our government-driven medicine. They come because of the quality of our private sector medicine. And those over the age of 50 are rightly skeptical. I'll go a step further. They're knowledgeable about what socialism brings. I've spent time behind the Iron Curtain. I saw it up close and personal, and it's horrific. I needed, actually, during Soviet era time, I needed some medical treatment in Poland for a staph infection, and it was just shocking. I mean, the lack of quality, and you mentioned just a moment ago the lack of quality and even of access. Another example is in the entire north of us, all of us here, the entire province of New Brunswick has only one MRI machine. So you'll wait a couple of years to get an MRI. How ridiculous is that? And that so at the end of the day, look, we have a medical system like every other medical system in the world that is imperfect, but it's the best in the world, and I think we should stay with it.
Right, but yet the Democratic candidates, how do they not know this? I mean, have they not traveled?
Oh,
do they
know
not
it.
know? I mean, I lived in Spain and had a problem, and my anesthesia, Robert, was 3 shots of whiskey. That's what they gave me to make me feel better because they couldn't administer anything.
The irony is that they know, and they fall into two camps. One is the, socialism can't be that bad camp, which is really ironic because most of them saying that have lived long enough to know that that's nonsense. Can't we just reapply Marx in a better way? No, it doesn't work. Okay, the idea of nirvana on earth, paid for and run by the government, doesn't work. The other side of this is that they do know that it doesn't work, but they are in the business of trying to convince you that free medical care, free education, free everything actually can be paid for by somebody else besides you. And that isn't true either. The tax base in the United States, if you're going to pay for magic things that you think the government can do with a wand, the middle class is going to be the one taxed for that. And we know that if you're going to spend your dollars, a dollar spent in the private sector gets what they call, one of my graduate degrees is economics, and what you get for that is a 16 times bounce. So if I'm going to put a private sector dollar behind a bag of potato chips, I have the people who make the bag, the people who make the paint on the bag, the people who grow the potatoes, the people who cut the potatoes, the people who cook it, et cetera, et cetera. If you pay for the government, you get a bureaucrat. And the bottom line is common sense tells you that is not the direction America should be going.
You mentioned at the outset with respect to AMAC, the association of which you are national spokesman, that their interest in federal solvency. So let's talk about that a little bit because there doesn't seem to be much interest in federal solvency in either political party in Washington. And this is a problem not just for the stability of our nation. It's also a problem in terms of acrimony, intergenerational acrimony. There was some interesting arguments this week, a number of pieces, including a new book coming out by William Lind about a class war that's intergenerational in some respects. And think about, again, the percentage of people under the age of 35 that want to live in a socialist society rather than in a quasi-free society like we have now. And part of that, the argument goes, is, look, you've had the boomers in particular who have broken the intergenerational compact between their ancestors and their progeny, and maybe less Gen Xers, but millennials and younger feel like they're not going to, and the stats bear this out, they're not going to be able to create as much wealth through home ownership. The opportunities are not the same. The opportunities to be part of the ownership society more generally, beyond even home ownership, are not the same. And this is creating real outsider-insider dynamic between the generations to say, you guys basically cross the bridge and then cut it, and now I can't get across, so why not take from you to give back to me because you rigged the system for you?
So I think that this again comes back to the basic philosophical argument that we were having a moment ago. Is more government better or is more government worse? The reason that we have a solvency problem, there are several contributing factors, but one is the idea that Social Security should essentially be unaccountable, pay for everything, and run wild, and that will somehow drain the next generation which it would, incidentally, if the boomers are going to all be paid for that way. The reality is that if you go back to the origins of Social Security during FDR, this was not the intent of Social Security. And I think the irony here is that AMAC actually has a proposal out that creates a solvent Social Security environment through a series. It's complicated. It's a formula. But at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is that individual liberty brings with it individual responsibility. Civic rights and all civil rights and all of the things we think of as freedoms that we'd like to see out there come with civic duties. And what that ultimately boils down to is that the individual is the chief person responsible for their own destiny, which is why most younger people, and actually many boomers, long ago recognized that their own private savings, 401ks and some of the other tools that we have out there are much more likely to be the way that they live long and prosper than somehow depending on the government. And by the way, it goes well beyond retirement. 529 plans, saving early to avoid tax liabilities for educational expenses for your kids. All of those things point backwards to the idea that the private sector is what generates wealth. It's what generates security. It's what generates long-term. But
that necessarily means that at some point somebody's going to have, or some buddies are going to have the courage to say, we cannot run we cannot run a Medicare system where you pay $1 in and get $3 back in services. We can't continue to run these Ponzi schemes.
You are absolutely right. And, I worked in the Ronald Reagan White House as well as George Herbert Walker Bush, and in those days on domestic policy more than foreign policy. And I will tell you that Reagan knew this way back 40 years ago when he was running, and when this was the 40th anniversary of the year he ran for president, and the second time when he ran in 1980. But he knew this very well and tried, in fact, almost got it over the line, a reform with Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill ultimately backed out, Democrat leader of the House at the time. But he knew that at the end of the day, you have to reform federal debt. You have to get the deficits down. The priority should not be on major spending by the federal government for either medical or retirement costs of the average American. At the end of the day, that is a responsibility that you have to plan for, you have to work for. At the same time, I think the reason AMAC and a lot of members of AMAC think strongly about solvency is that, at the end of the day, you'd like to believe that when you're on and gone, that you nevertheless have a strong America, that the intergenerational, the sort of Burkean, you called it a social compact, sort of John Lockean, but the idea that there is a connection between the generations that went before and the generations that will come after is healthy. That's what a lot of these conservative Americans think. They want to believe, as they rightly should want to believe, that there is this bond. And for that bond to be true and strong, you cannot make forever in debt the next generation and the generation after that. So, I think the smartest move is to cut federal spending, particularly entitlement spending over the long term, use a formula which keeps it fair, look out, grandfather in those that are here today, but create a change in expectations for the future. And there are people like Rob Portman, senator from Ohio, who have been very vocal on this point. And I think Donald Trump recognizes that you have to protect older Americans at the same time you protect the solvency and the long-term sustainability of the American promise.
He is Robert Charles. He's a former assistant U.S. Secretary of State, ran a major portion of the U.S. House Oversight Committee. He's a national spokesman for the 2 million-member Association of Mature American Citizens, AMAC. And, Robert, look for Amy Jacobson's application in the mail.
I'm on the website right now.
In the coming days. Yeah.
I can be a lifetime member for $500.
Well, and let me just tell you as a footnote, if you join for 5 years or renew for 5 years, I wrote a book last year called Eagles and Evergreens, which celebrates the influence of the World War II vets. It's 45 stories. It got well reviewed nationally. I mean, with Ronald Reagan's former chief of staff, Buzz Aldrin, Bill Cohen. Even the Washington Post, believe it or not, said, you know what, these stories are worth hearing. But if you join for 5 years or renew for 5 years, you get a signed copy of the book too.
Oh.
All right, I'm not eligible yet, unfortunately, Robert, but I look forward to that many years down the road. Robert Charles, amac.us is the website. Robert Charles, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Dan's going to sponsor me. Yeah, my AMAC membership for 5 years. It's only $59.95. Okay.
Thanks for breaking that down for me.
You're welcome. And Mr. Charles joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information. to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.